thanks for meeting with me today, Monica. So, Monica is actually a friend of mine, so I'm really thankful to her for being here, giving me her time. Yay. So, yes, Monica and I have been friends for a little while. Our kids are friends too, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's really fun.
But so for our students, if you wouldn't mind, so introduce yourself and tell everybody what you do.
So my name is Monica Gallegos, and I am a speech pathologist, and I have been doing that since 2000. And yeah, that's it. Right now, I'm currently mostly a stay-at-home mom, but I own my own business, and I see a few private clients, and I've worked in a couple of different settings that I'll talk about later.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. So I bet there's a bunch of people who don't know, what is a speech therapist. What is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's kind of a tricky one because there's such a variety. Most people, the first thing they think about is working in a schools, working on sounds, like maybe saying S's or R's, and that is one very, very small aspect of what we do, and one population. So I tell people we can work with populations from birth up to like the elderly. So and in a variety of places. So in hospitals, private practices, rehab centers, schools, those are some of the main ones. You can even, I have friends of mine who work for the DOD, Department of Defense, and they've worked overseas with children on, yeah, it's really cool. So they worked overseas with children on the base, so doing therapy in a school setting. But it's a different thing. It's kind of cool and fun because they get to travel. And my friend in particular, she lived in Germany for a while, and she lived in where else? In Japan. And then
oh my gosh.
Yeah, and then another friend of mine has a background in speech pathology, but she was in the hearing impaired community, or working with the hearing impaired community a lot. And she started working with the cochlear implant companies.
Ooh.
So now there's different things you can do with that background. You can go, and it just kind of depends on where things lead you, I guess, sometimes, or what your interest is.
Okay.
But yeah, with infants, that's tricky. I don't know if you want me to go into detail now.
Yeah, sure. Go
But
ahead.
with infants, a lot of times we work with children with feeding difficulties. So let's say kids who are born with Down syndrome or cleft palate, cerebral palsy, or some kids that were born totally fine, but maybe they were premature, so then they have feeding issues, trouble latching, things like that. Aspiration, which is liquids going down the wrong way, so then they can't gain weight. They can get pneumonia and get sick. It's a really scary thing. So they have to work on whether or not they need feeding a different way, like through an NG tube, which is a nasogastric tube, through their stomach. So that type of feeding issue, that can actually be with all ages. So for different reasons, you have a car accident, you have a stroke, for elderly or adults. And that's one of the areas I really enjoy working with. Even though it's really sad, it's really fun when they finally do make progress, because it's a big deal. It's eating. So it's like most people think everyone can do that easily. And then other reasons are sometimes just muscle issues. There could be allergy or stomach issues or other medical issues that can cause them to have difficulty eating. And then the one that most people know is articulation and language, like not talking, not talking very much, or not being on target with their milestones. And usually a pediatrician would recommend that, and then they would go to like either a hospital or a private practice setting or something. And then school age, even stuttering, that's another factor, another thing. Voice therapy, that some children or even adults have trouble with vocal nodules, which affects their quality of voice. Breath control, if they have raspiness, if they have had a history of like their tonsils removed and it's now affect their vocal quality, they may need therapy, depending on the kid. Not often, but it could happen. Cleft palate, like I said. And then another interesting one that I didn't even realize until I was in the profession is working on people who are in the business profession, and they're wanting to work on improving their I guess speech quality, if they have like accent reduction. So if they, not even necessarily other countries, but even other parts of the United States. Like I, for instance, am from Texas, and if I had a big southern drawl, which I do sometimes, that could be something a therapist could working on changing it to sound a little more what they call standard American English, to be a little more professional sounding. So that's interesting, and actually could be very lucrative because it's not something insurance pays. So it's really,
So
it's an interesting area because it would be out of pocket, private pay, so that's the other thing is I
Wow.
tell people you can make, you can do really well with it depending on what areas you go in. So you could
Okay.
do something as, like working in a school setting and having a 9 to 5 or 9 to 3, I guess, with
Right.
summers off, you know, which is really nice. You can work in a hospital setting, which, you know, is a typical work day. You can do private, set your own hours. But then also the downside is you don't get paid if they don't show up.
Yeah.
So
I
that's a
heard
bummer.
that.
But there's such a variety, like I said, so
That's
it's nice.
really neat, so you can really find all different
Mhm.
areas, all different settings, that's
Yeah.
really great.
And the nice thing is if you get bored with one area, you can always study up and kind of maybe go into a different area. You may start with pediatrics and decide, you know what, I want to work with the elderly now, I just want a break, or like my friend, you know, I'm kind of tired of doing a little bit of the therapy thing. I think I wanted to go more into like working with the cochlear implant side of it,
Yeah,
and
that's
just and
neat.
she does more like discussing the benefits of cochlear implants and talking to families. So it's really interesting. There's just such a variety that there's still more that I'm not even aware of. So there's so
That's
many out
awesome.
there. There's
Yeah.
different aspects of it.
So just in case students don't know, so the cochlear implant is for kids who were maybe born deaf, but
Right.
now they can
Right.
hear.
Yeah. So it's kids with sensorineural hearing losses where
Yeah.
a hearing aid wouldn't benefit them. So then it's a surgical procedure.
Right, so they
Yeah.
get that, so then, yeah, but then, of course, they've grown up not being able to speak, 'cause
Right.
they couldn't hear themselves. So
Right.
then, yeah, wow.
So it's really interesting.
Wow, that's neat. So tell me, so if somebody was interested to become, you know, a speech therapist, speech pathologist, you know, what background do you need? What education and
Yeah. You.
licensure, all that stuff?
Yeah, you would need a bachelor's, and they call it different things, but it's, I think when I went to school, it was communication sciences and disorders, depending on the school, but it's,
Okay,
you could ask a counselor about that
Okay.
specific, the name, depending on what school you went to. And then, it requires a master's degree, and then you complete, something called your, it's called a CFY for short, but it's a clinical fellowship year. So it's
Oh.
basically a year of working where you don't make quite as much money because you're not full-fledged therapist. You have someone supervising you pretty closely.
Okay.
But during that year, you're really being trained. That's after you finish school, after you finish this test that the name is not coming to me right now, but it was a
Okay.
huge test at the end of your
Okay.
master's degree.
Okay.
And then then your clinical fellowship year, and then after that, you also, during that time, you get certification through the state that you're working through, similar to a
Okay.
teacher, just like
Oh,
a certification. And then pretty much that's it. It sounds like a lot, but it's really pretty quick. And I think if
Okay.
it's something you're interested in, it goes by really quickly.
Awesome,
Yeah.
okay, well, that's really good. So it's like a master's degree kind of
Master's
level?
degree,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, that's great, okay. Do you have like a favorite story of like a favorite patient or anything
I
like that?
do.
Oh, goody, okay,
I know.
please share.
I think of one because he's just like a miracle child. But
Okay.
there's a little boy, and his name is Emmett, and he actually has a website. So I know his mom would be fine with me sharing it
Okay.
because she shares it with
She shares it,
everyone.
okay.
But it's called Emmett's Fight, and it's EMMETTS Fight. Emmett's
Okay.
Fight. Yeah, I believe that's what it's called. And his whole story, his whole background, he was a year old, typically developing, doing very, very well. And right before his first birthday, he got into a remote control for, I think, a VCR or TV or something, and was just playing with it like kids do, and somehow got it open and got into the battery, the button battery, and swallowed it, unbeknownst to his family. They didn't realize that's what he had
Oh my
done.
gosh, okay.
And long story short, he almost died and had several surgeries. But he's a miracle kid because he is now, I believe, 7 or 8. I haven't worked with him in a few years. But he's had multiple surgeries, even as recent as a few years ago, and was initially delayed because of that, because he was in the hospital for, I think, a year or two.
Oh my gosh.
In and out of the hospital, but in there for, I think, a year. Because he almost lost his life, because what happened is it wasn't identified initially. They just knew that he wasn't wanting to eat. He was really fussy. He didn't have the language to really tell them what had happened. He wasn't even a year yet. And once they realized what had happened, he went into emergency surgery to repair it. What had happened is it got lodged in his esophagus.
Oh my
So
gosh.
basically, your throat has two pathways basically. One, your food, which
Mhm.
goes into your stomach, and then the other one would go to your lungs, your airway, so the
Yeah.
trachea. And the lining between them, the battery acid basically caused a hole to
Oh,
be between the
gosh.
two. So anytime he would drink, it would go into his airway,
Lungs.
or
Oh.
eat, it would go into his airway. So it was just dumping into his airway, and of
Oh.
course that causes pneumonia and causes
Yeah.
pain. I mean, if you choke on something and it goes down wrong, it's super uncomfortable. Imagine it continuing to happen,
Oh.
and he can't tell you.
Right.
So I think they finally realized it when he started coughing up blood,
Oh.
and they had to rush him back to the hospital because he had been
Oh
sent
my
away.
gosh.
It's really sad. His story's really sad, but I like to share it because there's so many things out there that have button batteries that we're not aware of.
Yeah.
So I always like to share his story because it's sad, but he's a miracle because he's doing great now.
Oh,
He's
good.
he has surgical repair because he had a tracheostomy for a long time, which is basically a breathing tube in his throat to breathe through, because all of the structures there just were not functioning.
Mhm.
And so they had to basically rebuild everything.
Oh my
And so he
gosh.
has scar tissue, but now he does have a different vocal quality, like we talked about, because everything there has just been, basically, it was destroyed and they had to rebuild it. And so they rebuilt it as best as possible, but he has a different vocal quality, but everything else he seems to be doing really good. He's eating better now. He initially had to get a G-tube to eat through his stomach because he couldn't eat here because all of that
Oh
was
my
so
gosh.
destroyed.
Okay. One simple
He and his
thing.
family went through a whole lot, and one simple thing that could happen
Any
easily to
kid.
anyone.
My kid plays with remotes.
Yeah.
Not anymore, but
Right, yeah. Well, even
up
things,
until now.
I tell people, even things I didn't realize my daughter was playing with a card that plays music.
Yeah.
And I didn't think anything about it. I'm like, oh, and I know about this story. I've
Mhm.
heard this millions of times, and I tell people about it. I didn't realize the card, when I opened it, there was a button battery,
Oh,
super
sure.
exposed.
Mm.
It was, she could have reached in and gotten it
Wow.
easily.
Uh-huh.
And it looks like a candy. Those are the little
Yeah,
tiny ones that look
right,
like little candies. They're
circle ones.
silver.
Oh my
So it's
gosh.
very scary how easily accessible they are. They're in hearing aids, so if
Mm.
people change them out and they leave them somewhere,
Right.
they're in
Oh
so
my
many
gosh.
light-up toys that are easily breakable.
That's right.
Halloween toys, if you see, there's even some that I've seen for the mouth. They're
Ah.
supposed to be light-up toys you put in your mouth, like fake teeth or something that
Oh,
light up.
right, yeah.
Or these silly things. And I'm like, they're literally putting the battery in their mouth. It's
Oh,
just covered in
gosh.
plastic. But if a kid breaks it, that's,
Right.
And I think
Ah.
from what I've read on the subject, it happens more often than not, but typically they don't find out until autopsies what was the cause of their child's death. So I tell, again, I'm not trying to freak anyone out, but I kind of am, because I think it's an important story.
Wow.
So he's one of my favorite clients because he's just made such tremendous gains, but also his story, I think, needs to be told.
Yeah,
So
right.
it's very important.
Get the word out.
Yeah.
So you helped him with speech, with
Yes,
eating,
I helped him at
with...
a point. There were several people that helped him, but I helped him when he was, I don't remember the exact age, but I think he was like 3 or 4. So it was after he was discharged from the hospital, and he had been in rehab for a little while, and then he came to see me. So he had prior therapy, lots of therapy in the hospital. And when he came to see me, he was eating a little bit, but he was really reluctant to eat a lot of foods. He hadn't eaten for years, and so of course it was a scary thing.
Yeah.
And I think it was uncomfortable. And another thing he had to have done is he had to have his esophagus periodically opened up because it would tighten up on him. And so there's so many factors and things he had to work through. But again, his mom shares his story on there, and it's so amazing. And he's the cutest little boy you'll ever see. He's so cute and so sweet and so positive. And so, but I did work with him. We worked on language. We worked on feeding was his primary thing to work on.
Okay.
So yeah, and he's made a lot of gains. So it's really
That's
exciting.
great. Wow. So you can really make a difference in kids' lives and seniors' lives
You
and
can.
business professionals
Yeah.
and wow. Okay.
And typically it's not, I tell people it's not a one-person thing because the parents are working on things.
Mm.
Typically they're getting occupational therapy, which could be working on sensory integration and working on making them more comfortable, um, making them maybe more comfortable using a spoon or doing things with their hands. A physical therapist who's working on their core strength to sit up better, which allows them to then eat better. So it's never a one-person job. I'm just one tiny piece of the puzzle, but there's so many other people that are putting things into it. Yeah, teachers and doctors and specialists, and so everything kind of has to be in order. I tell people it's like a Rubik's Cube. You have to get all the pieces in order for things to work. And for some kids, it just happens very naturally, and for other kids, it doesn't for different reasons.
Wow. So depending on the setting, you could be kind of more independent, or you could be a part of a medical healthcare team.
Right. And even if you're
Wow.
independent, you're still part of a team. You're just, I would still, like, even as an independent therapist, I'm never truly independent because I'm calling the gastroenterologist, is it safe for him to try this food? Or I may be consulting with the therapist who did his swallow study to see if food's going down properly. Now are we able to move to this next thickness of food, or can we try this? So even though I'm technically working on my own, I'm always consulting other people,
Wow.
not with every child, but with lots of children, to get ideas and to get feedback and to see what's appropriate to try, when it's appropriate to try certain things from a medical perspective. So it's really interesting.
Is there a demand for speech therapists?
Definitely.
Okay.
And I looked it up recently, and I
Okay.
saw, as of a few months ago, I believe the growth was 18% in the next.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah, to 20.
That's significant.
Yeah,
Okay.
to 2024. Some studies I saw, or one place I saw, 18% up to 24%. 24% is huge. So I was
That's big.
Yeah.
If you don't know, that's big.
That's really big. Yeah. So there's definitely job opportunities and really good growth.
So they'll
for this.
find a job if they go into this career.
And the other thing is, my parents get calls, and I live there in college and haven't lived there in quite a while, and they still get calls for people. Well, they did when they had a landline. They don't anymore.
Okay.
That was a few years ago. But they would get calls for job opportunities for me, and I get calls on my cell phone and emails, and there's just we're not having to look for it. People are often looking for us, which is really nice. But the nice thing is you can be a little particular about what you want then, and what setting you want to work in, because there is such a demand. So,
so you can kind of be picky about what
you can definitely be picky.
Awesome.
So it's nice.
Okay, this is kind of a off-the-cuff question, but I actually don't know the answer. So, physical therapists there's PTAs, and occupational therapists, there's OTAs, the assistants. Is there such thing as an STA?
It's an SLPA.
Okay.
Speech language pathologist assistant is what they're called, SLPA. And yes, there is. That's a good question.
Okay.
So an SLPA is someone who has their bachelor's degree. So they wouldn't have gone on to get their master's. They still have to get certification through the state.
Okay.
So that is a good job to have. The growth is not quite as good, because they have to have supervision. Obviously the pay isn't quite as good. The demand isn't nearly as high, because what has to happen is the facility has to then pay for a full SLP to supervise the SLPA. So it's kind of double work and a little more costly, I think, for them.
Okay.
So oftentimes it's harder, from what I've heard, for SLPAs to find a job. So I always recommend, if you want to do that, that's something to do, but it's typically better to just go on and go ahead and get your master's, because so much more opportunities open up for you just with a few more years of school. So it's really, in my opinion, worth it. I was actually an SLPA for 1 year. After between undergrad and grad school. I just wanted to make sure that was something I definitely wanted, that it was an area I really enjoyed. And so I worked for a year in a school back in Texas, and I realized I enjoyed it, but I also realized there was a lot I still needed to learn, which even with your master's, there's always a lot you still need to learn. That's with any profession.
Sure.
But it was nice, I think, with my master's degree, during that program, you learned more, and you were just exposed to more, giving more supervision. So I always recommend to people who are SLPAs, if they enjoy it, that they should continue on. If they feel like this isn't a good fit, then they can go maybe do something else. They can continue as an SLPA, but it's just really hard to find. It's very competitive. Typically, school districts are what hire for that.
So do you like your job? Do you enjoy it?
I love my job, and I'm eager to get back. I was just telling Jackie that when my daughter starts school, then I'll be able to see a few more private clients, and that's really exciting. So I've enjoyed staying home with her and being able to have that opportunity, but it'll be fun to also be able to, dip my toes in the water again and kind of do a little bit more with working with kids. And like I said, it's kind of like putting together that Rubik's Cube, so it gets you thinking and just really is interesting. So I'm looking forward to working with a few more kids.
Yeah. So you're a happy person then?
Yeah, definitely.
So, kind of a different question. Do you have any advice just how to be happy for our possibly younger students, possibly non-traditional students, or anybody in the world? How to be happy?
That's a good question, and you told me you were going to ask me that,
Yeah.
and I thought about this one a lot. And the first thing I thought about is that realistically, just as a student, as a person, I don't think it's realistic to be happy 100% of the time for anyone. That's my first thought. Just if you're a person who's like, oh, I'll do this and that will just solve everything. I don't think there's one answer, but I do think the two top things that came to my mind are if you have good family and friends, just someone you feel comfortable talking to, whether it's family, friends, coworkers, students, other students. I think just having someone to vent to, chat with other moms. I just noticed that was a huge thing once you found like your niche of people, like what people call their tribe, whatever that is. It makes such a difference to be able to call or shoot a text or whatever and just get feedback and know that you're not alone in whatever struggle or journey you're going through.
Yeah.
Everybody's going through something at some point. And then the other things, I think if you find an occupation or a hobby, or hopefully both, or maybe bring them together, that you really enjoy, then I think that takes a lot of stress off too. If you enjoy what you do, then work doesn't feel like work. It just feels like a fun challenge or an exciting new adventure. Yeah. So it could be whatever you decide to do, and I think nowadays millennials are thinking of all these new ideas of how to put together things they enjoy. I saw one where somebody was like a life coach, but she was traveling, and so she went and they did life coach adventures for women, and they went like to different countries and did like vacation and meditation and all these cool things. I'm like, that's a cool thing. Yeah. So I think if you just take your passions and your interests, and there's a book I read called Strength Finders, I think it's Strength Finders 101, when I was in college, and it really helped kind of guide me a little bit with finding out where my strengths lie. Okay. And I always recommend that to kids in high school or in college that aren't sure what they want to do. Okay. But I think that's a really good resource. And then if you find something that you're passionate about, again, I think it'll help with being happy.
Yay. Right on. Cool, thanks. Yeah. Is there anything else you think about your career that we should cover? We didn't.
Nothing I can think of off the top of my head.
You enjoy it? It's a good thing to do.
I enjoy it, and I recommend it. Okay. I will say, I tell people, I feel like it combines a little bit of teaching, because you're working with like people, children if you like, that's what my focus. So it's kind of teaching, a little bit of psychology, so if you wanted a minor in like psychology, it's very helpful. I think I didn't, I wish I had, because you're working with families and different personalities and different family dynamics, and then I think it's also obviously can be medical too, so it kind of combines a lot of different aspects. So I think if you're interested in something that's a medical background, but you feel like, I don't know if I want to be a doctor, or, nurses work really hard, and but if that's, for me, that wasn't something that seemed like a good fit, but I knew I wanted the stability of something in the medical field. Yeah. But I didn't know exactly what. This was a good fit for me. But awesome. Yeah. So
that's a good way of putting what you do.
Yeah. Nice. I just feel like it kind of combines a lot of different aspects. So.
Cool. All right, great. Yeah. So it's okay if somebody wants to talk to you more, maybe get some more info?
Yeah, definitely. They can email me or text me. I think text is probably the fastest. Okay. But they can also email as well, and I can give you that information.
Yeah, I'll put the info on the screen. Awesome. All right, well, thank you. That was really kind of you to give us your time today. Really appreciate it, Monica.
That was fun.
So, yeah, hopefully I'll see you soon and your little girl. We'll get together.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much.